So today we are doing my top 10 favourite books that I read in 2020. So this is the last of the favourites worst videos that I've made over the last few days. We're finishing on a high note with the top 10 books that I read in 2020. The list though, I just wanted to say two things. First of all, I actually feel very blessed because I feel like I've had a fantastic reading year. That was actually really difficult to make a top 10 books of 2020, which is no bad thing. I read a lot of really wonderful books this year and kind of wish I could talk about all of them, but you can always go and look at my wrap-ups for all that information, all of the books that I've enjoyed. So I've come up with a top 10. A little bit of work, but we got there. The other thing I wanted to say is that I actually have two honourable mentions. First honourable mention is Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I am currently reading that as a buddy read with my friend Alison. We're definitely not going to finish it by the end of December, which is fine. It wasn't on the cards to get it read by the end of December, so I can't put it in my top 10 of 2020, but I have a suspicion that I'm going to really enjoy it, so I think that it needs to be a honourable mention. The other one is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. So this one gets an honourable mention because I couldn't, in all honesty, put it in my top 10 list for the simple reason that particularly the last book I found very difficult to read because of the content, not because of the writing style, the characterization. There was nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's absolutely an amazing trilogy, but it's very gritty and very intense, and particularly the last book, I just found that I really wasn't in the right headspace to read the book. I really want to acknowledge that these books are amazing. Beautiful world building, incredible story structure, fantastic, just amazing, but very intense, so that's why it gets an honourable mention. All that being said, let's talk about my top 10 books of 2020, shall we? I'm going to start at number 10 and work my way up to number 1. Coming in at number 10 is White Rage by Carol Anderson. This book is also really intense and will make you really uncomfortable and really mad, but I think that it's an incredibly important read. It is the history of race relations in America from the Civil War, or just before, up to present. I just found it incredibly informative. I found it very upsetting, but I'm really glad to have read it. I feel like it really forced me to think about things. It really forced me to confront my own way of thinking and my own life. I think it's an incredibly important book that everyone should read, and therefore it gets the number 10 spot. Next up, at number 9, we have Skyward and Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. Probably I'm cheating a little bit because I'm going to have a few books in here that are actually series. Sorry if that's cheating, but it's my list, so I'm gonna do it. Anyway, Skyward and Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. I actually preferred Starsight slightly more than Skyward, but they were both really fantastic. So these are both science fiction young adult books, and we follow Spencer, who is 16-ish. She wants to join the flight school on the planet where she lives, but her father was branded a coward, and that's a really big deal in her society, and so it's really a struggle for her to manage to get into the flight school. So it's about that, and then it's about what is going on, what happened with her father, what is going on with her now. So that's mostly Skyward. Starsight is a bit different, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in Starsight that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it definitely relates to the first one, but it's not what you'd expect an immediate linear follow-on. I'm not sure I'm explaining it very well, but anyway, I thought these were fantastically well written. I really liked Spencer's character. I thought she was very well fleshed out, a very believable character. I really liked the way, particularly in Starsight, he wrote the other characters, particularly some of the alien races that Spencer and others interact with. I thought that was really well done, and yeah, I just found it really interesting that a white middle-aged man can so effectively get into the head of a 16-year-old girl. So I thought that was really well done. It definitely made me understand what all the fuss about Brandon Sanderson is about. Still haven't read any other books of his, but definitely planning on it. Science fiction isn't really my normal area. I'm more of a fantasy reader in general, so that might be why it went further down the list. Again, I really just had a great reading year, so there were other books that I just enjoyed a little bit more, but definitely amazing books. Number 8 is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So I actually started reading this roughly this time last year. I don't know whether it should be in this list, but I didn't finish it until January this year, 2020. So I'm putting it in this list anyway. For those people that have watched my worst books of 2020 video, you would know that I did talk about overwriting. There's an argument to be said that Erin Morgenstern overwrites as well. I personally don't think that she does. I think that she manages to balance that line between having that really poetic, expressive, verbose writing style with it being still concise in what the word choices that she uses and the language that she uses. So even though she's very whimsical and very, like I said, verbose and full language, it's very deliberate and she doesn't overwrite each section. Even though she gives grandiose descriptions, they're very pointed and very pointful, if that makes sense. Anyway, I really enjoyed her style of writing. The Night Circus is about a circus that comes in the middle of the night and disappears the next day or several days later. It's only open at night. It's not a normal circus. There's genuine magic happening. It's also a love story. That's all I'm going to say about it here. I've talked about it in other videos. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was my first reading of Erin Morgenstern, as it was for most people. It was her first book. I did read The Starless Sea. It's not on this list. I did really enjoy it, but The Night Circus was just my favourite of the two. So then we move on to number 7, and we are actually going into contemporary. Contemporary is not a category genre that I would have thought would go on my top 10 list. I definitely have read contemporary books and enjoyed them, but usually I would have said fantasy or magical realism, fabulism would beat out any contemporary, but I've read quite a few this year and really enjoyed them. And this one at number 7 is Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. This is also quite a hard-hitting book in a lot of ways, but it is done in a way that is very easy to read. The prose is very easy to read, the word choices are very easy to read, and it feels like you're having a conversation with someone that you know. It feels very contemporary and very modern and very genuine. So it's about a young black woman in the UK. Her partner has asked to go on a break and he doesn't really explain what he wants, and so she's on this break even though she doesn't want to be, and it's about her trying to sort of find her way in that and find her way around dating and around what she wants and what the world is offering her and some trauma that she's experienced in her life. And yeah, it's a character study within a contemporary story, and I thought that it was amazing. I thought that it was incredibly well written. I actually didn't like Queenie overly much throughout a lot of the book as a character, but I really liked the way she was written. I thought she was, like I said, very believable, a very well-rounded, fleshed out character that could be someone that I genuinely actually would meet or know. The other characters, although they are not as important because they are not what the story is about, are still given that feeling of reality. You feel like they're people that you might know, people who are good and bad, flawed and not flawed, etc. This is definitely how Queenie is as well, and I thought that it was a really great look at being black in a modern Western society and how that is different from being white in a modern Western society, and how there were lots of things that obviously it was obvious that these were real, genuine things that people could experience that I've never experienced because I do not live their experience, if that makes sense. Yeah, so fantastic book, highly recommend. Number 6 is another contemporary. I actually didn't have it on this list, but then I reread it quite recently and I remembered that I absolutely loved it, and now it's gone on the list and it's number 6, and that is The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. So this is another contemporary book that reads very light-hearted, it's very easy to read, it has very simple, straightforward prose, and on the face of it, it's just a love story, but it has some really hard-hitting topics as well. I really like the way that Beth O'Leary wrote her two main characters, so we switch between two different points of view, and she has managed to make me really believe that we are switching between two points of view, which I think would be something that would be very difficult to actually achieve. So we swap between Leon and Tiffy. Yeah, you really get the sense of the two different characters. At no point was I ever reading it feeling uncertain about which voice I was reading. And then I really love the way that Beth O'Leary discussed some really dysfunctional and toxic relationship things that can happen, and she did it in a really, I felt, now I've not experienced abuse or gaslighting in a relationship, fortunately, so I'm not certain whether it was genuinely believable. If I'm not an own voices reviewer basically, so don't take my word for it, but I personally felt that the way that she had the character of Tiffy kind of come to an understanding of what she had experienced and looking at it with new eyes and then working through that trauma, I thought was really well done and really believable. So definitely trigger warnings for gaslighting and for emotional abuse, but it's done in a really respectful way, I think, in a really understanding way, and I really, really enjoyed it. Plus, she just has a really great way of writing. It's very simple, very direct, but very believable and just really easy to read, which is a fantastic thing for a contemporary, I think. Okay, so number 5, we are halfway. Number 5 is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. Where the Crawdads Sing is a literary fiction. We follow a young woman called Kaya from when she's very young up to when she is an older woman and has passed away. I really enjoyed the descriptive language in this book again. Delia Owens is not an author like Erin Morgenstern. It is not a case of being purpley, verbose, romantic, flowery descriptions. She is very direct and to the point, but she gives a very in-depth description of the environment in which this book takes place. The book is set in marshlands somewhere in the States, I'm not sure where. The descriptions of the marshlands really evoke that sense of place and the sense of how living in the marsh has shaped this young girl and this young woman and shaped her experiences and her knowledge and her personality. And I thought that was amazing. There's definitely an overarching storyline, there's definitely an overarching plot, but I personally don't think that's the main point of the book. So if you are a very plot-driven reader, it might not be the book for you, but personally I just thought it was beautifully written. I did enjoy the overarching storyline, but I more enjoyed the characterization of Kaya, the main character, and the descriptions of the marsh. I just thought they were fantastic and yeah, really enjoyable. The next book that we have maybe should be further up the list, but this is where I've put it. Anyway, is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. What can I say about this book that hasn't been said already by someone else with much more thought and understanding than I could bring to this book? This book is incredible. This book will make you angry, this book will make you cry, this book will make you laugh, this book will just move you. It's amazing. It's beautifully written, the characters are so well written, the experience in the story is so well written. You really get a sense of the community, of what's going on in the community, of how the interactions and the experiences have affected them, how it affects the main character Star, and I just, wow. This book is so important and I think that it should be part of the syllabus, certainly in the United States, but even here in Australia. So the storyline is a African-American young woman, 17 I think, in the United States, witnesses her good friend be killed by the police. It sort of divides the community. There are a lot of people in the area or the States in general who argue that he had a weapon or that he was resisting arrest or that there was some kind of outstanding reason why he was killed by the police. But you see from Star's perspective what actually happened on the night, and none of those things were true. So he was murdered by the cops, and it's a very timely book. Especially given some of the stuff that's happened this year with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. So I think that it's incredibly important, and I really do think that people should read it. Everyone should read it. It really gives you a good understanding of the situation in the States, the feeling in those communities of what their experiences are, and it's definitely just incredible. Number 3, we actually again have 2 books, and they are Nevermore and Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. I couldn't separate the two. I love them both very, very much. They are just beautiful. So they are a middle grade series about a young girl, Morrigan Crow, and when she is 11 she is taken to Nevermore and entered into trials to become a member of the Wondrous Society. It's really well written. Again, I love the descriptions. I love the way that Jessica Townsend uses language. As you can tell, this is a very important thing to me. But it's so whimsical. It's so much fun. It's a fantastic, beautifully written middle grade adventure story. But at its heart, it talks about friendship. It also talks about belonging and fitting in. It talks about being yourself. And it's just, I think that it's super amazing, and it should also be on the syllabus. I think that young children should be read it. I think that older children should read it. I just highly recommend, and I just think that it's beautiful. Like I said, the descriptions are incredible. They're so well done. Got that sense of real sense of wonder and whimsy all the way through the story. Even when things start to get dark, there are just such fun, well-drawn, fantastical characters, and I just can't speak highly enough of them. We're up to number 2, guys. We're nearly done. Thank you for sticking around. Number 2, I'm sure that if you've been around for any length of time, you will be not at all surprised to discover that my second favourite book that I read this year was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I actually read this back in February, so I might even be due a reread because I can't really remember a huge amount about it, but it stayed with me for almost an entire year, so that must mean something. Ninth House, we follow I think she's like 18-year-old woman called Alex, who is someone who can interact with the other side, as it were, so she can interact with the paranormal. So it's an urban fantasy paranormal. It's an adult book. I think Leigh Bardugo was mostly known until Ninth House as young adult. I just found it so brilliant. I just thought that it was, again, beautifully written. I really liked the character of Alex. Well, I didn't really like actually her very much a lot of the time, but I really thought the characterization was done really well. I really liked the different houses of the occult that make up this network of houses that the Ninth House watches over at Yale University. So it gives a whole new spin on the whole thing from the point of view of sororities and fraternities, which probably had more meaning to people who live in the States than it did to me, because I don't really get all of that. Anyway, it gives a different spin on that side of life. Yeah, I just think that her descriptions of the veil, of crossing over the veil, of the other side were really well done. I thought like I said, the characterization of Alex was incredibly well done, and I thought that it was just nice and creepy enough without being overly scary or creepy. There are quite a few trigger warnings for this one. Definitely suggest that you look it up before you read it, because there are a lot of really full-on topics that are discussed. Assault, sexual assault, yeah, just pretty much anything you can think of is in there. So it's very hard hitting. It's definitely not something you want to read if you're not in the right frame of mind for. But I just thought that it was amazingly written, and definitely recommend if those trigger warnings wouldn't trigger you. And if you're okay with paranormal books, I would highly recommend. And now we are up to my favourite book of the year. This was a difficult one to decide. All of these books that I have mentioned I have absolutely loved, but my favourite book that I read this year in 2020 was The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, which I'm sure comes as absolutely no surprise to anyone. I loved this book. I loved the world building. I loved the characters. I loved the dragons. I loved the history. I loved the action scenes. I loved just everything about this book. I loved the sex scenes, everything I thought was so well done, so purposeful. It's a really big book. It's like 804 pages long, so it's not something that, you know, takes a bit of investment, but it's definitely worth it. I felt like it might have been a little bit slow to begin with, but give it a chapter or two and it really drags you in. We follow a number of different characters, which I thought were really well done, and again I could definitely tell the different characters when I was reading about the different characters, so I wasn't at all uncertain about which character I was talking about. So Samantha Shannon gives them each their own individual voice, which I thought was incredibly well done. And just overall, it's a really fantastic, interesting, unique world that I've not seen before. The dragons were just incredible and so very interesting and so very different. And also, a lot of the time in fantasy, high fantasy in particular, dragons are very revered, and that wasn't the case in everyone in this book. There were certain parts of the world who actually thought badly of dragons, which I thought was really interesting. You really got a sense of the history of the world and of the situation that all of the different kingdoms were in and why they were in those situations and how they got there. But it wasn't info dumpy at all. She managed to weave all of that history and all of that knowledge into the story in such a way that it felt really natural and felt really, normal and natural. There were some points where I wasn't certain of what was actually going on, but that's okay because that's part of the world building. So to give a sense of that deep history of people having that deep connection to their society, to their culture, there are oftentimes things in our own cultures that we do or traditions that we keep that we don't necessarily understand where they come from or why they're important or what they mean. And you really got a sense of that with this one, that there was so much going on and so much in the world and so much history that you didn't necessarily need to understand it all, but you were given enough hints to be able to get the point and enjoy the story. And I just thought it was amazing. Highly recommend. If you love fantasy, you should read it. If you're not a huge fantasy reader but you want to give it a try, it might be a good place to start because it is a standalone, which is often not the case with those kind of high fantasy magic dragon sort of books. So I definitely would recommend if that's something that you're interested in giving a try. But yeah, if you like fantasy, definitely read it. I personally thought it was amazing and it was my favourite book that I read this year. And that's it, guys. We're done. Thank you so much for sticking with me throughout that whole long collection of books. Let me know what your favourites were this year. Did you agree with any of my opinions? Did you disagree with any of my opinions? I'd really love to know what your favourites were, what your least favourites were. Please comment below and let me know all of that. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy it, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you next time.